Hello to anyone watching this. So a nice big direct has finally come and gone, and even though despite its length it wasn't the best, like I genuinely went through the 5 stages of grief after not getting any Mario Kart World DLC, there were still some good announcements, the best for me definitely being Mario Tennis Fever. Like, tennis has always been my favourite sports series, so I'm quite naturally inclined to be incredibly excited for it, but it does very much feel like I'm in the small minority with that opinion. Like, obviously there's the crowds who are just excited to get another Mario game, or the people like me who love the tennis games, but away from that, it does just kind of feel like there's a massive sense of apathy towards this game existing, so today I just wanted to go through everything we've seen so far and just try and explain why I think this game is worth being excited for. Like, I've very much been bitten for having this sort of blind optimism before, but you know what? We've only seen 2 minutes and that 2 minutes has been incredibly good for me, so I'm just going to run with that, and in half a year's time I can look back on this video and hopefully laugh and not cry or just sort of stare blankly. Now, I am going to try and keep all of my discussion here focused on the individual aspects of the game that we've already seen, but I just want to make it clear that this isn't like a frame-by-frame analysis. Like, all of the different modes and stuff were quite clearly explained in the trailer, and I mean, pretty much all this stuff is quite self-explanatory anyway, so I don't need to go into that, like, specifically, but I do just want to talk about what we can infer from what we've seen and build on top of it with fun speculation that probably won't be addressed until the new year at this point, when we either get a random overview trailer or maybe even a cute little 15-minute direct that will hopefully have more of a purpose than the Mario Kart World one. But before we dive into the trailer, I just wanted to talk about, like, one part of the discussion surrounding this game online that I just really don't understand. And obviously, like, since I am talking about online debate, I'm not, like, going after individual people or anything like that. But I just feel like I've seen a lot of people have the general thought of, oh, why are we getting another Mario Tennis game? Which, in some aspects, I can understand, because there has been a rumour going around for years at this point that we were going to get another baseball game, and I do think it would have been cool to get a baseball game, but to act like we got tennis instead of baseball, which I do feel like I've seen some people say, is just completely unfair. Mainly because Camelot does tennis games, Namco does baseball games. So the only way that we were getting tennis before baseball is if both games were ready and Nintendo was just like, I guess we'll do tennis first, yeah, that'll be fun. You know what I mean? It's just, like, really not fair to act like this is stealing the slot of another sports game. And rolling on from this, it very much feels like people feel that it's not been long enough since the last tennis game. Like, we really don't need another one, like we just had one. At least that's at least how I'm reading some people talking about this game, which quite aggravates me, because this is the longest gap we've ever had between any tennis game and nearly any sports game. I'm not going to spend minutes going through the entire timeline of Mario sports games, but all that you need to know is that the gap between Aces and Fever is about 8 years, and the longest gap between tennis games before that is between Power Tour in 2005 and Open in 2012, so 7 years, and that's not even counting the Wii re-release of Power, which would make the gap only about 4 years between that and Power Tour and some other tennis games at certain points. So this is the longest gap we've had between tennis games for sure. And even if we look to other sub-series, like obviously we have Strikers, which took about 14 years, and Baseball, which has taken 20 years. So yeah, those have obviously had longer gaps, but I don't think anyone wants another Strikers game right now, and Baseball is a completely different company, so it's not being snubbed, but it would be cool if we could get one, all that. But if we look at golf, that had quite, obvious gap between World Tour and Super Rush, where people were just begging for a new golf game, like, wow, we really need it, where's the new golf game, come on guys, we need it now. And you know how long the gap was between those two games? 7 years, a year less than between Aces and FIBA. And I'm not saying that the 7-year gap was like justified or not an antsy wait for me and all the other sports/golf fans, but you know what I mean? Like, this is a perfectly justified wait between tennis games, and I'm really tired of people acting like it's not. Like, yeah, we obviously had all of Ace's post-launch support, which gave it about a year's extra worth of life, so that would make this about a 7-year gap. But still, you know, counting just base releases, this is the longest gap between pretty much any Camelot sports game series, you know what I mean? So yeah, I do understand if people are just not excited for this game because tennis is pretty much the only sports series to release on every single console and everything like that, but it just simply has been enough time since the last tennis game to warrant a new one. And the Switch 2 is only a few months old. Like, there's going to be plenty of time for all the other sports series to get some representation on this console, so let's just get tennis out the way and then we can just wait for all the other sports games to appear, you know? Just let's try and look at this a bit more favourably. But anyway, let's properly get into the game now, starting with the character selection, always the most fun part of any Mario spin-off. And the direct announcer guy just straight up said there's going to be 38 characters in this game, so that makes my job speculating the roster a lot easier. I have sort of passionately designed a little mock-up of what I think this game's roster could look like. You know, saying anything above 30 just immediately implies all 30 characters from Aces are going to return. Then we have the 5 BBs from the story mode. And then I went for Monty Mole because he just sort of randomly has a model shown in the story mode. And then Nabbit and Talking Flower because this game is obviously quite Wonder inspired. I can obviously see a lot of this roster being shaken up. You know, we might not get everyone back from Aces. But, you know, the fact that we've seen Chain Chomp and Blooper already very much implies that this game is being built on top of Aces, so why would you not bring everybody back? You know, famous last words, but still, I mean, even with the characters that we haven't seen so far, you know, obviously Wario's gonna come back, since, you know, he's got a baby form here. You know, Toad's a lock-in if we've got Toadette, and even in that weird sort of banner full of advertisements that they keep plastering behind things during the trailer, we can see ads for Dry Bones and Kamek back from Aces. Although we can also see one for Roy, and I mean, it would be cool if he could be here, even as the only Koopaling, but I can't imagine that happening, so I don't know how much we can take from this banner full of ads. But you know, I'd be kind of surprised if Dry Bones and Kamek didn't come back. But in terms of the 8 out of these 38 characters, on top of the 5 BBs, you know, the other 3 characters can be pretty much anything right now. You know, the 3 I went for do feel like the most logical to me, but there are plenty of other options, you know. Depending on how the story mode pans out, we could instead get babies Daisy, Rosalina and Yoshi, or we could get Wiggler in because he had that emblem abandoned in Mario Tennis Aces, like code or whatever. We could get this Brixie Princess back for whatever reason. You know, there are plenty of ways the last 3 characters could go, but I just wanted to lock in these 3. If I'm right, I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. All that. But anyway, I also want to speculate something slightly smaller about these characters, and that's what potential character type these new bibbies could be. Now, Mario, Luigi and Peach have already been in tennis games, so they already have a character type, but maybe Wario and Waluigi are fair game to guess about. And, you know, this is completely meaningless, apart from just making me do a little fist bump when I open up the game and see what types they are. But I just want to put it on the record, just so if I'm right, I'm right, all that. But I reckon both Baby Wario and Waluigi are going to be all-around types. You know, just to kind of have that parity between the normal Mario Bros and the Baby Wario Bros. You know, one pair are both all-round, the other are different types to each other. You know, I can just see that happening. I can feel it. It's in my bones. It's gonna happen, man. But the other main character-based thing that could be brought back from Aces to be discussed here are the costumes, which We didn't see any different looks in the gameplay parts of the trailer, but that's like fair enough. Like, why would they just chuck in Pink Yoshi into one shot? But we did see in the main adventure mode cutscene Mario and Luigi and all the bibbies in their overalls, so you know that could possibly hint to all the costumes coming back in the base game. But you know, if they just made them like ranked tournament rewards again, I wouldn't be mad. You know, I always see that as a nice reason to come back to the game every month, even if it's like literally the exact same costumes from Aces and it feels a bit cheaper when you're getting them the second time round. If we can still get them, that'd be cool, but you know, it would be nice if we could get them in the base game this time. The other main piece of evidence that kind of feels like it goes against these costumes coming back in some way is the fact that both Bowser and Toadette aren't wearing their tennis costumes that they got through Ace's post-launch tournament cycle, which just feels a bit weird. It kind of feels like they're just wiping the slate entirely clean of every single costume, even the ones that would make more sense for these characters to wear by default now, which is a shame, but it hopefully could possibly imply, at least in my head, that they could still be brought back, even in the base game. So yeah, it's kind of marginal right now, but either way, I just want cosmetics. You know, and hopefully we can get even more this time. You know, different coloured Lumas, Birdos, Toads, everything like that. You know, chuck in additional ones if they have the time or energy. Now, in terms of how we could unlock these costumes in the base game, there are a couple potential ways. The first could be through some kind of coin shop. You know, you get a couple coins for completing matches or the adventure mode or trial towers, which you can just piss off and spend in a nice little sub menu, and I do love a good shop like that. I think that was one of Open's coziest aspects, just going into the Mii costume shop, so it would be nice to bring that back. But we could also get costumes for completing all the different trial towers, which I think would be very much appreciated, because otherwise, I'm not trying to be mean, and I do like playing things just for the sake of checking a box, but why would you just have trial towers if there wasn't something to unlock at the end of them? You know what I mean? But anyway, another potential cosmetic aspect I want to talk about comes with the Fever Rackets, because I really hope that even if you turn off their effects, you can still, like, equip one just for purely aesthetic purposes. Like, with 38 characters and 30 Fever Rackets, that's 1,140 combinations, and I really want to take advantage of that, even if it's not, like, gameplay-wise, because I'm sure that once I've unlocked all the Fever Rackets, I'm just going to find one that I really like. So it'd be cool if I could still take advantage of all the other ones in some way, you know? So now we're done with all the character-related stuff, we can move on to the potentially more important aspect of this game, the gameplay. Now, in this segment, it may or may not come across I'm slagging off Aces, but just know that I got hundreds of hours out of that game, and I do love it for what it is. I just feel like the direction that this game is going to be simply more fun than what Aces ended up doing. So the big new gimmick for this game with the Fever system just looks so much fun. Like, it essentially adds in a proper item system to the tennis games, which I just think is sorely needed, and it's implemented in a way better way than Ultra Smash, where you just sort of randomly had the Mega Mushrooms chucked in, because here you charge up and choose when to use your Fever Shot, so it just makes it feel like properly strategic and all the big fancy fun words to make you feel smarter about playing tennis. We can see that there's still an HP system, but we don't really get any idea of how it's going to work. Like, with the shot of Mario and Bowser running through the fire, does that count as them losing HP? Or is it like returning zone shots in Aces, where if you don't time it properly, then it still bounces back, but you lose some HP? Or if you don't hit it back properly, you lose HP and the Fever effect still activates, so it's like proper risk versus reward. And you know, what happens if you lose all your HP? Do you just completely lose the game because it doesn't seem like there's a life/racket system, or do you just lose the point? I really hope you just lose the point. Like, let's compare it to Aces. You know, I will state that I did enjoy that game's fighting game aspects for what they were. It's just sometimes they made it feel like matches were a lot more procedural than they needed to be. Like, you just charge up your special gauge, use your special shot, aim it at your opponent, and they're most likely going to be completely unable to time it, so you just instantly win. You know, it just felt like it took away from just the pure joy of playing tennis. And, you know, obviously in that game you could turn all of that off, but that just made the experience so underwhelming, because the tennis gameplay was clearly built around getting to use all of like the trick shots where you fling yourself around the courts, and I have a whole different set of problems with them because they just feel incredibly cheap after a while, especially because most of the time it's just really hard to gauge exactly when and where to use it, so it just kind of feels like luck at a certain point, especially with new players who don't even know what's going on. You know, it feels like there's the biggest skill gap between new and experienced players compared to every other tennis game. So yeah, it just kind of feels like all the fighting game stuff, if you're in the mood for it, can be a lot of fun, but if you just want to play tennis, it just detracts from the overall game, because the simple mode in that game was just too simple. Because unlike with FIFA, you don't get like a proper dive. You get like a really basic dive which basically just ruins your shot, but in FIFA it looks like dives don't ruin all of your momentum, and on the Japanese website it also stated that jumping shots are back, which will just help like more basic gameplay feel a lot more dynamic. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you don't feel like playing with the fighting game aspects in Aces, you're just left with a not as good game. But if you turn off the FIFA aspects in FIFA, you're still going to have a fun enough tennis game. So yeah, I just feel like the gameplay is already really coming together in that aspect. You know, however you want to play this game, whether you go all in on the gimmicks or you just want fun tennis, you're going to be catered for, which I just really didn't get in the end with Aces. Although, to be fair, that entire rant I just have may be rendered meaningless, because we can see multiple shots in the trailer, characters without FIFA rackets still having their rackets glow as if they're ready to perform a FIFA shot, which is probably just going to be like a normal special shot, which if you don't time properly could potentially take away some of your HP, which, you know, could lead to KOs and the exact same problem from Aces. But, you know, we'll see. It could just be because this is the first trailer and they didn't want to show off too many FIFA rackets, so they just had more characters than you would see normally in gameplay just using their normal rackets. So who knows, it might be like completely negligible, but if they do have the normal rackets be just as useful as FIFA rackets, then there could end up being a slight problem. But who knows, maybe if you turn off FIFA rackets, it could still let you use a form of special shot that's basically just like a fast and hard to avoid one, and you don't need to involve the whole HP system. So yeah, it's hopefully going to be fine, it's all going to work out. But either way, I just think the FIFA system looks way more fun than Ace's combat system, because there's just an obvious better sense of variety. You know, instead of just one special shot per character, here you essentially get 30. So based on that alone, I think it's just gonna be way more fun, especially over time. Once you've started playing the game for a good long while, you know, you're still gonna be expecting the unexpected and all of that. So yeah, I just think gameplay wise this looks so much more compelling than Aces, even if it strips back all of the mechanics that game introduced. So let's move on to the courts. Now, we haven't seen too many so far, but what we have seen looks incredibly wacky. Like, you obviously have your basic grassy stadium and incredibly cozy looking hard court. Like, it kind of reminds me of the court the Mario and Wario Bros were playing on in the intro cutscene to Power, so even if it's unintentional, I just see that as a nice reference. But in terms of the more crazy courts, these are genuinely really crazy looking. Like, again, taking strays at Aces, the court gimmicks in that game were so unintrusive to the point they just sort of felt negligible. And, you know, I sort of prefer when a court is more tame, but, you know, I mean that in the sense of, like, just no gimmicks at all, just like a really cool setting. So I always just ended up turning off the gimmicks in Aces because they were just so meaningless to a certain point. But in this game, the gimmicks look absolutely unavoidable, so when I feel like it, that's going to be a lot of fun to just get to grips with, as long as I can actually understand what's going on, which does look like it's going to be a bit of a nightmare to do, especially on the Wonder Seed courts, but, you know, I'm sure I'll get the hang of it eventually. The interesting thing here to talk about is just the fact that these gimmick courts seem to be put into their own separate mix-it-up mode, rather than just the standard exhibition rules, which feels a bit weird on the surface. Like, why can't they just be blended into the exhibition matches and you just go and pick a gimmicky court to play on its gimmick? But who knows, there might be some special rule sets that you tweak before going into these gimmick matches that make them more needed to be in a separate menu. So, you know, as long as we still have the basic exhibition mode and you actually get a court selection screen from launch this time, you know, I'll be happy. And I'm excited to see what other courts we could get. You know, based on the shots we've gotten from the adventure part of the trailer with the airship, the ice cave, the desert ruins, I think we're looking at having a hopefully very good roster of courts, as long as we get more than bloody 11. You know, I'm so sick of tennis games barely scraping past 10 courts. You know, we need to start getting a really good number. Surely they're not that hard to develop. It's not like Mario Kart courses where you need a whole track and giant space. You literally just need like 50 square meters to run about and that's it. You know, surely they can't take that long to make. But anyway, moving on to the other side modes, tournaments definitely look like tournaments. It would be nice if there could be something to unlock for completing them all, but just like I said earlier, I'm happy to check a box for the sake of checking a box, and, you know, more tennis gameplay is always fun to have. Trial towers do look quite interesting though. I do hope there's a good number of them, but at the end of the day, it does kind of just look like a tutorial for getting to grips on the offensive and defensive aspects to all the different fever rackets, which does feel quite necessary, especially when there's so many of them. And if you can go back and play on floors you've already completed, you know, it would be a good way to show new players how to deal with all the different fever rackets as well. And as for potential side modes we haven't seen yet, I just really hope there's a good mini-game section. Like, hopefully they can mini-gamify all the gimmicky aspects to the mix-it-up court, or at the very least just bring back Ring Shot in its fun, fleshed out mode from Aces. We don't need the swing mini-games back. You know, if they're there, but I certainly won't be playing them unless there's a costume to unlock at the end. But on to the last main game mode shown off in the trailer, the adventure mode. And I'm not gonna lie, for all the general positivity I've shown towards this game, I have absolutely no hope for this adventure mode. Like, after Tennis Aces and especially Golf Super Rush just had such objectively awful and clearly unfinished stories, I just can't possibly expect anything from this. You know, I'm just gonna go in, play some Tennis's Baby Mario, and hopefully have fun. You know, it does look like there's an interesting set of environments, and I like that you can properly run around them all rather than just from point to point on a map or just sort of in the area, in the entrance to the golf courses. And the fact that you're shown in a facility playing different mini-games does feel very evocative of Game Boy Color Tennis's story mode, where you got to properly build your stats in the way that you wanted. So if that's coming back, that's going to be fun, hopefully. It's just, you know, like I said, the Switch sports story modes have been so terrible, so I can't expect anything. So that means that I can't be disappointed by it either. But anyway, that's just about everything I wanted to talk about from this first good look at the game. I do hope I came across as, like, generally positive, at least towards FIFA. You know, I can take or leave Aces now. I'm probably gonna, like, pick it up again now that I'm, like, getting excited for FIFA and ready to play it, and I just want to do some tennis-y stuff. But, you know, I do think that this is a proper evolution of the tennis series on top of what Aces introduced. So, yeah, I just think that this game deserves to exist in general, and I'm incredibly excited for it. You know, even if it was less promising than it looks, I'd still just be excited for more tennis. You know, I absolutely loved Open, and that was pretty much as basic as you could get. So, yeah, I'm happy to just get another tennis game in general, and just to embrace all the aspects of this series that I love. Like, especially getting the biggest character roster in the series is so exciting for me, because one thing that I like to do is just take sets of 4 characters that all have the same type and just play with them together. You know, I love just categorizing things, and the tennis games have always really helped me, like, with that. You know, they've enabled me, essentially. So, to have more characters to do that with is just gonna be fun, you know? So, yeah, well, like I said, I have no idea how this video came across, but I'm just so excited for this game, and I really hope everyone else can be, especially if it gets a good direct, like the DK Bonanza one back in June, that can just show everyone why this game properly deserves to exist. I think that would just be lovely to see. But yeah, if you have any questions or concerns, do let me know. Just, if I had to predict one last thing for this game, it's that if there's post-launch support with characters, you know, after their reappearance in Wonder with its Switch 2 edition, I think it would be cool to get all the Koopalings in here. You know, hopefully not over the course of 7 months. You know, maybe they could do it like the December 2018 Aces tournament, where you get one Koopaling for participating in singles and the other in doubles, and then Wendy can get paired up with Pom Pom, and it would only take up 4 months. So yeah, that's just another fun prediction. But bye bye. Have a nice day.